Nobody tells you what the silence sounds like inside a royal palace at 2 a.m. Not the recruitment brochures, not the ceremonial briefings, not the old veterans with their clipped vowels and their chest full of medals who act like the weight of it all sits light on them, like a silk sash rather than a millstone. They tell you about the history, the lineage, the duty. They do not tell you about the sound a child makes when something is wrong, and how that sound, and coming from behind a door you are sworn to protect but not permitted to open without direct authorization from 3 different ranks above you, will rearrange everything you thought you understood about what this job actually is. I have logged 2,247 nights in royal service. I have a notebook. I use it obsessively. Timestamps, weather, anomalies, the number of footsteps I hear before a corridor goes quiet again. My commanding officer once told me the habit was neurotic. I told him the habit was the only reason I'd ever caught anything worth catching. On the night of the 14th, I wrote 1 entry before everything changed. 2:11. Wind northeast, guard rotation nominal. Prince Louis's wing, quiet. I underlined quiet twice. That was my first mistake. The second was assuming quiet meant safe. The palace breathes differently at night. I know that sounds like the sort of thing a person says to sound poetic at a dinner party. The kind of vague romanticism that makes historians nod and sensible people check their watches. I am not being poetic. I am being precise. In the day, Kensington carries the sounds of a working institution. The heels of aids on marble. The distant mechanical sigh of climate control systems, press briefings behind closed mahogany, the polite performance of monarchy in full operation. At night, all of that drains away, and what's left underneath is something older. The creak of beams that have held up 2 centuries of secrets. The way certain corridors produce an echo half a beat too slow, like the building is repeating you back to yourself with mild disapproval. I notice these things because it is my job to notice these things, and because if I stop noticing, I will spiral into the particular brand of anxious boredom that once led me to reorganize the entire watch schedule by alphabetical surname, which did not go over well. My name is Captain Alistair Fenwick, and I have been the night duty officer for the East Residential Wing for going on 4 years. I document everything. I always have. My notebook, black cover, narrow-ruled, bought in packs of 6 from a stationer on Marylebone High Street, goes everywhere I go. Right now it is in my left breast pocket, pen clipped to the spine, and what I have written in it tonight until 2:17 amounts to nothing remarkable whatsoever. 2:11, wind northeast. Rotation nominal. Prince Louis's wing, quiet. 2:14, Guard Corporal D. Mercer completes East Corridor sweep. No anomalies. 2:16. Mercer returns to post. Left bootlace slightly undone. Did not correct him. Noted it. That last one. A habit. I log small things because small things are where it starts. The undone bootlace. The guard who blinks too much at a particular door. The ambient sound that exists for 3 seconds when it shouldn't. At 2:17 I heard it. Not loud. And that's the thing I want to be clear about, because when I've described it since, in the debrief, in the follow-up with the household officer, in my own notes, which I will probably never stop revising, people assume I heard screaming. Chaos. Something cinematic and obvious. It was not obvious. It was a sound like a small boat bumping against a dock. Soft, rhythmic, wrong. I was at the end of the East Corridor, 23 steps from the door to Prince Louis's bedroom suite. The Corporal Mercer was at the opposite post near the stairwell, which put him roughly 38 steps further. Between us, 2 antique console tables with fresh lilies, 1 CCTV blind spot I have flagged in writing on 4 separate occasions, and the particular quality of 2 a.m. silence that I have come to trust the way some people trust their knees before rain. I wrote, 2:17, sound, origin unclear, East Corridor, near suite door, investigating. Then I was moving. The protocol, And I say the protocol as though there is only one, when in fact there are 17 relevant procedures that cascade through each other like a particularly bureaucratic waterfall. The protocol says that a duty officer responding to a potential disturbance in a principal's residential suite must first notify the senior night commander, second, confirm with on-site protection officers, and third, only if both preceding steps have been completed and documented, approach the door. I have read those procedures approximately 400 times. I was at the door in 11 seconds. This is the part where I should explain something about Guard Corporal Daniel Mercer that the paperwork does not cover adequately. The paperwork says he is 26, 2 years service, rated exceptional on his protection assessment, commended for composure during the photographers and scaffolding incident last spring. It notes his background: Derbyshire, grammar school, one older sister. No financial concerns flagged. It does not note that he has a habit of standing with his weight slightly on his left foot when he is uneasy. It does not note that he carries a photograph in his helmet lining, which I have never asked about, and which he has never mentioned, and which I only know about because I am the sort of person who notices the faint rectangular impression on the inside padding of a ceremonial helmet. It does not note that when Mercer arrived at my shoulder, 19 seconds after I reached the door, which meant he had run, which meant he had heard it too, his breathing was controlled in the very specific way that a person controls their breathing when they are choosing to control it. "Sir," he said, "you heard it." Not a question. "Yes, sir." "Get me Hartley on Channel 2. Do not escalate to senior command yet. Do not." I held up one finger, and which is not a protocol-sanctioned hand signal, but has become one between us through sheer repetition. "Give me 30 seconds. I pressed my ear to the door. The sound again. Closer now, or the same distance, but my calibration adjusting. The way your eyes adjust to dark, and suddenly a shape that was nothing is a chair, is a table, is something that has a name, the rhythm of it. Soft and then softer. A repetition without desperation in it, which was almost worse. Because desperation would have meant conscious distress. This was something else. The thing I want to record accurately, because accuracy is the only honest thing I have, is that in the 30 seconds I stood at that door, I made 4 separate decisions that each violated at least one standing procedure, and I made all of them in the way you make decisions when your body has already started moving and your training is trying to catch up to your instincts. I used my override key. The lock gave. Yeah, the door opened inward on hinges that the maintenance log says were oiled in October, and they were because there was no sound. Just the widening of the gap, just the room assembling itself in the low amber glow of a nightlight, the carved bedposts, the enormous perfectly made expanse of bed, the small dark shape on the floor beside it. On the floor, not in the bed, sitting on the floor. My notebook was in my hand without my having reached for it. The pen was out. I don't know when that happened. Prince Louis was 6 years old, and he was sitting with his back against the foot of his bed, knees drawn up to his chest, rocking, gently, rhythmically. The sound I had heard from 23 steps away through a solid mahogany door was the back of his small head making contact very softly with the carved wood of the bed frame. Once, and again, and again. His eyes were open. He was not asleep. He was not, as far as I could tell in the next 3 seconds, injured. He was somewhere else entirely. Mercer appeared in the doorway behind me. I heard the very specific way he stopped breathing. "Get the on-call physician," I said very quietly. "Channel 2 only. No alarm. Do not use the word emergency on the radio." I was already crouching, lowering myself to the floor in the way you lower yourself toward something that startles, slow and visible, making yourself smaller. "Go." His footsteps left. I heard them become silent in the corridor, which meant he was running on the balls of his feet, which I had never taught him and which he had arrived already knowing. "Hello?" I said. My voice came out wrong, not authoritative, not procedurally appropriate. Just, hello? Like you'd say to someone you'd bumped into in a garden. Prince Louis's eyes moved to me. The rocking slowed, but did not stop. There is a section in the protection manual about interaction with principals in states of distress. It is 3 pages long, and I have read it the way I have read everything connected to this job, with the obsessive attention of someone who suspects that knowing a thing completely is the same as controlling it. The 3 pages say, maintain calm, do not touch without consent, defer to medical personnel, do not attempt psychological intervention. And none of the 3 pages accounted for being alone on a cold floor with a 6-year-old at 2 in the morning while he looked at you with eyes that were present and not present simultaneously. I sat down, on the floor. My uniform trousers, pressed that morning, crease sharp enough to divide a room, made contact with the cold hardwood. I opened my notebook. I wrote the timestamp, 2:19. I don't know why. It's some hinge in my brain that goes for the familiar thing when the familiar thing is all it has. He watched me write it. "What's that?" he said. Not a question precisely, more like a person naming something they're seeing at a distance. "A notebook," I said. "I write things down. Everything I see, mostly. Times. What I hear." His head had stopped moving against the bed frame. Why? So I don't forget. He considered this with the unnerving seriousness that small children sometimes bring to questions that adults have decided are rhetorical. Then, "I hear things." "What sort of things?" A silence. Not the silence of evasion, the silence of sorting. "When it's dark," he said. "Things move." I wrote, 2:20. PL awake. Floor self-placed, responsive. No apparent injury. Reports auditory. I stopped writing. "Things move," I said. "In your room?" He pointed, and toward the window. The curtains were heavy brocade, gold and ivory, the kind of fabric that costs more than I make in a month. And they were closed, but not completely. At the bottom edge, a gap perhaps 3 inches wide let in the particular orange-gray of London night, and the shadow thrown by that gap moved as the wind moved the fabric. A shifting, elongated, perfectly irregular shadow, moving softly across the floor. He had been watching it all night. I sat with that for a moment, and the trained part of my brain, the part that logged bootlaces and CCTV blind spots, was already running the mathematics. Child awake, shadow, self-soothing behavior, not a security breach, not a medical emergency in the clinical sense, nothing to activate the triple-tier escalation for, nothing that would require the kind of incident report that goes to 4 offices and gets cross-referenced for 6 months. The other part of my brain, the part that does not have a protocol, I was sitting on the floor of a prince's bedroom at 2:20 in the morning, looking at a shadow that had frightened a 6-year-old badly enough to put him on the floor and keep him there, and understanding something without being able to name it yet. "That shadow," I said, "has been there before?" He nodded. "And you've been watching it?" Another nod. "By yourself?" This one took longer. Then, "I didn't want to wake anyone up." I stopped writing. My pen was in my hand and the page was open, and there was nothing in me that could make a mark on it, because what had just been said to me was the kind of thing that does not get entered into a log. Not because the log is wrong, but because some things arrive in a frequency that ink can't hold. A 6-year-old boy in a palace with more staff than a small hospital had spent God knows how many nights watching a curtain move and deciding on his own that his distress was not worth the trouble of mentioning to anyone. I did not write that down. I don't need to. It's the kind of thing that lodges. Behind me, I heard the soft return of Mercer's footsteps, and with them a second set. Dr. Hadley, the on-call physician, sensible shoes, no drama. I heard her pause at the door, heard her read the room. "Captain Fenwick," she said very quietly, in the tone of a person who has understood and is not going to make it worse. "2 minutes," I said. She waited. I looked at the shadow. I looked at the boy. "Here's what I'm going to do," I said, the way you say something when you're deciding it at the same time as saying it. "I'm going to move that curtain. Is that all right?" He looked at the curtain. He looked at me. He nodded. I stood, crossed to the window, took the brocade in one hand. It weighed something extraordinary, this curtain, which felt right, and pulled it fully closed. The shadow disappeared. The room was simply a room. I turned back. He was still on the floor, but the rocking was gone. He was just sitting now, looking at the place where the shadow had been with an expression I have subsequently tried to describe in 6 different ways in 6 different drafts of my private log, and the closest I have gotten is this: the expression of someone who has been proved right about a fear, and is not sure yet whether that is better or worse than not being proved right. Oh, Mercer was beside me before I'd taken 2 steps back toward the door. "Sir," he said, voice barely anything, "the physician says—" "I know." I glanced at him. His weight was on his left foot. "You all right, Corporal?" He took a half-second longer to answer than the question warranted. "Yes, sir," he said. I wrote nothing. I just looked at him. The half-second told me everything I needed to know and nothing I was prepared for. Doctor, and Hadley was the kind of woman who made rooms calmer by entering them. I don't know how people develop this quality. I have spent my entire career being the sort of person who makes rooms slightly more tense by entering them. So I have a particular admiration for the opposite skill. She came through the door of the suite with her bag and her silence, and something in the arrangement of her face that communicated, "I am not alarmed, and therefore you need not be alarmed." And within 40 seconds, she had the boy on his feet, and in conversation about whether he preferred the curtains open or closed generally, as a matter of preference. He said closed. She said she would make a note. I stepped into the corridor with Mercer. The door clicked shut behind us. In the corridor, the long east corridor with its antique consoles and its slow-bloom lilies and its one CCTV blind spot, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and dated it and wrote nothing else. And because I was watching Mercer stand with his weight on his left foot and wondering how long I'd been not asking the right question. "Tell me about the photograph," I said. His chin came up the precise amount a chin comes up when someone is deciding whether to be offended or honest. He chose honest, which told me something about him or confirmed something I'd already logged. "My nephew," he said. "He's 4. I waited. "He has nights," Mercer said, and then stopped, and as though those 2 words were all the sentence required. And they were. He has nights. A completely precise statement that communicated, this is a known thing in my world, a recurring thing, a thing around which I have organized some portion of my caring. I understood what I was looking at then, why Mercer had run on the balls of his feet, why he had heard the sound from 38 steps away, why his breathing had done that specific controlled thing. He knew the sound. He'd been listening for it for 2 years, in a different house, for a different small person. "Right," I said. "I should have," he started. "You called me on Channel 2 and you didn't escalate before I told you not to," I said. "That's the job. You did the job." I wrote something in the notebook that was only partially legible, even to me. "The photograph is going back in your helmet lining. We're not having this conversation." He looked at me. "Thank you, sir," he said, very quietly. And I clicked my pen. Put it in my pocket. "Bootlace," I said. He looked down, crouched, retied it. I gave him 30 seconds and then said, "I need you to walk me through the last 4 nights." He straightened. "Sir?" The boy said things move. Not something moved tonight. Present tense, recurring, which means this is not the first night he's been on that floor. I pulled the notebook back out, uncapped the pen. I want to know what our rotation looked like for the past 4 nights. I want to know if anyone noted anything, and if they didn't note it, I want to know if they noticed it. Those are 2 different things, Mercer. The distinction landed. He nodded, and I watched him access whatever file system he kept in his own head. The one that was not a notebook, the one that was just the accumulated attention of a person who had learned to pay attention under domestic duress before he'd ever learned to pay it under professional instruction. Night before last, he said. I was on until 0400. I heard. It was quiet, but not the usual quiet. He paused, and I appreciated the pause, because he was working toward precision rather than toward something that sounded confident. Like a room holds its breath. You didn't log it. No, sir. No defensiveness in it, just no. Why? He looked at the door. Because it stopped, and because... He stopped himself. Mercer. Because what I thought it was made no sense on paper. Hey, and I didn't want to put something in a log that made me sound... He chose the next word carefully. Impressionistic. Impressionistic. A grammar school word from a man who has learned, probably the hard way, that a certain kind of perception gets called soft when it exists in the wrong body, in the wrong uniform, at the wrong rank. I wrote 226. Mercer. Held its breath. Retroactive observation. Night of 12th. Threshold event. Not logged. Reason, plausibility fear. And I underlined plausibility fear, which is not a real compound noun. It was more expressive for being wrong. From now on, I said, you log it, whatever it is. You use my name if you need a backstop. I'll take the impressionism on paper. I closed the notebook. That's not permission to be sloppy. That's permission to be right. He held my eye for a second. Then, yes, sir. I heard Dr. Hadley inside the room, heard the boy's voice, answering something, and the particular rise and fall of a child finding his way back to ordinary language after a long time in some private country of his own making. The corridor was dim and long and smelled of the lilies, which at this hour had a different quality, heavier, almost medicinal, the sweetness gone to something fermented at the edges. I pulled out my notebook again, turned back to the beginning of the night, 2:11, wind northeast, rotation nominal, Prince Louis's wing, quiet, underlined twice. I stared at that entry for a long moment. Then I wrote, directly underneath it, in smaller letters, quiet is not the same as safe. I have written that sentence before in different forms. I have probably always known it. But there is a difference between knowing a thing as an abstraction and knowing it as something that sat on a cold floor with its knees to its chest for an indeterminate number of nights, deciding its fear was not worth raising. That was the decision that had been made. I'm by a 6-year-old. In a palace full of people whose explicit purpose was to ensure his well-being. He had weighed his distress against the cost of mentioning it, the fuss, the waking of people, the interruption of routines. And he had decided, night after night, that the cost was too high. I needed to think carefully about what that said about us. What I wrote instead was, 228, post-incident, wing secure, Dr. Hadley on site, Mercer, Dia, flag for commendation review. And that last part surprised Mercer. I could tell because he went very still in the way people go still when they are recalibrating what they thought was happening. Sir, you heard something from 38 steps away that you had no professional reason to recognize, I said. That's a competency. Write it up. He didn't argue. He'd learned, or perhaps he'd always known, that some offers don't get better with debate. What I did not write in the official log, And what I am writing now in the private notebook that lives in my breast pocket and will never be filed or cross-referenced or reviewed by any of the 4 offices that process incident reports is this. The thing that kept me in that corridor for the next 40 minutes was not procedure. It was the question of access, not physical access, not a breach, not the kind of access that shows up in a security audit or a CCTV review or the JTAC briefing I'd have to sit through on Monday morning. See, the kind of access that is the real work of protection and the kind that never gets named properly in any manual I have ever read in 4 years of reading them obsessively. The question of who a child can call for in the dark. I had a list of authorized personnel for this wing. 14 names, the protection team, the household staff on overnight rotation, the on-call physician, whom I had just used correctly for the first time in a genuine non-drill situation. All 14 of those names existed, in theory, as people this child could reach. All 14 had been vetted, trained, briefed, and rostered. None of them had been reached. I turned the page in my notebook, wrote, "Who does he know? By name, by face, by enough," and underneath it, "Do any of us know him?" At 2:44, the door to the suite opened. Dr. Hadley stepped out. She had the expression of someone who has done the hard part and is being professional about what it cost her. "So he's settled," she said. "No physiological concerns. I've spoken with the night household officer. There'll be a follow-up in the morning with the appropriate—" She chose her words the way she chose everything, carefully and without drama. "Relevant parties." "Good," I said. "Curtain?" "Secured, waited at the hem." She said it the way you say something that is both a small practical measure and a large human kindness. "He'll have the light on, low." He asked if that was all right. "Is it all right?" She looked at me as though I had asked a slightly unusual question, which perhaps I had. "Of course it is," she said. "Then yes," I said. "It's all right." She left. Her sensible shoes went down the corridor and around the turn, and the sound of them diminished, and the wing returned to the particular quality of 2 a.m. that I have spent 4 years cataloging. Mercer and I stood at our posts, and I wrote the timestamp and set my pen down and looked at the door and thought about the photograph in the helmet lining. Thought about a 4-year-old who also had nights. Thought about the way Mercer had run on the balls of his feet. Trained into him by a domestic thing, a personal thing, the kind of knowledge that an interview panel would not have known to look for and would not have known to value. I thought, we recruited for the wrong things. Or rather, that we recruited for the right things and called them something too narrow. At 3:01, I walked to the window at the end of the east corridor, lifted the latch. A cold draft entered, March in London, still with teeth. And I let it be cold for a moment, and then I closed the latch again and stood looking at the orange-gray of the city and the way the clouds moved across it, heavy and formless. When I turned back, Mercer was watching me. "You've done this before," he said, not accusatory, or observational. "Done what?" "Figured out that something's wrong before you have the language for it." I considered this. "No," I said. "I've logged it before. That's not the same as figuring it out." I tapped my pocket where the notebook was. "Logging it's a hedge, in case I'm right later. But tonight I was late." He didn't offer me the polite disagreement. He just nodded, slowly, in the way someone nods when they're not agreeing but acknowledging, which is the more honest response. "He's going to wake up tomorrow," Mercer said, "and there'll be lessons and fittings and probably some kind of engagement, and nobody's going to ask him how the night was." I didn't say anything. Just, "Nobody will ask," he said. Not a protest, not even quite a complaint. A fact, dropped cleanly, the way certain facts can only be delivered by people who have already come to terms with them. I opened my notebook, wrote the timestamp. 3:04. I wrote nothing else. And I sat with the open page for a long time, the pen uncapped, the white space holding everything I did not yet have the procedure for. There are 47 windows in the east residential wing. I have counted them. I count them the way some people worry beads or tap rhythms on steering wheels, not because the count will ever change, but because the act of counting is the thing I do when I'm trying to stay inside the part of my brain that functions. Tonight I counted 17 before I stopped. I stopped because something had shifted in the quality of the wing's silence. A different frequency. Not wrong, precisely. Not alarming, just new. The way a room changes when someone in it has finally, deeply, genuinely fallen asleep and taken some barometric pressure with them into that sleep that you hadn't noticed was there until it was gone. The boy was sleeping. The corridor was the corridor, the lilies, the consoles. A mercer at his post with his weight properly distributed for the first time in the last hour. I wrote 311. Wing quiet. I did not underline it, and then below it, in the smallest handwriting I have, tucked into the lower margin of the page where it would require deliberate seeking to find, someone should ask him. I capped my pen. I put the notebook away. The next name on the rotation to relieve me came at 600. I spent the remaining time at the end of the east corridor, watching the gap at the bottom of that window, the one that lets in the orange-gray of the city, and thinking about the 14 names on my authorized list and how many of them the boy could identify by face, and whether face was enough, and whether anything I had the authority to change would make it otherwise. There are questions I am not supposed to ask in this role, not prohibited, not written in any procedure I have read, just not asked. But the way certain doors in the palace exist without being mentioned, present but outside the frame of what is officially occurring. I have a new page in my notebook now. Clean. Dated. At the top, I've written one word. It is not a word I will define in this log. It is a direction, an intention. The kind of thing that once committed to paper becomes slightly less ignorable than it was when it was only sitting in the part of you that notices things before you have names for them. The word is who.